Hello everyone, it's Heather and I thank you for joining me for today's video. In January, after the holidays are over, a lot of people start to turn their thoughts to where they want to take a vacation that year or where they want to travel to. There's so many considerations as to when you should go to certain places. What are the crowds going to be like? Is it going to be too expensive? When is it less expensive? What's the weather going to be like? So I decided to take my 3 favorite types of travel or destinations, if you will, and combine them into this one video and go through each of the months of the year to talk about the pros and cons of visiting each of these places or doing each of these kinds of trips during each of those months. The 3 I'm going to talk about today are cruises, Disney resorts or Disney theme parks, and Europe. Now, within those 3 categories, there's a lot of variation and a lot of different actual destinations. Because, for example, there's 6 Disney resorts with theme parks throughout the world, 3 in Asia, California, Florida, and France. There's cruises all over the world that you could take, and Europe has many, many countries that you could visit. I'm going to base this on my own or my family's own travel experiences to give you an idea of what it's like to visit each of those or to do each of those types of trips in each month of the year to help you decide if you would want to do a cruise or go to Disney or visit Europe at each of those months, okay? So stick with me and I think you'll see what I'm getting at. All right, how I'm going to do this is I'm going to go through the calendar from January to December, and we're going to talk about each month one at a time in relation to each of these different types of trips. I'm going to share with you whether we have been there or not and what our experience and the pros and cons of doing that at that time in that month was. If I haven't done that type of trip in that particular month, we'll talk about that a little bit. And I'd really appreciate for those of you, especially for the ones that I haven't done that trip or been to that place in that particular month of the year, if you have done that, put it in the comments below and share your experiences, and especially tell us, would you do it again? Like, would you go on an Alaskan cruise in May again, or whatever it is, okay? So let's start with January. I'm going to take these in alphabetical order each time. C for cruises, D for Disney, E for Europe. I have not done a cruise in January. So I can't really give you a lot of pros and cons about that from my own personal experience, but I can say that January is one of the least expensive times to cruise. Now, I got to start this by saying there's not that many places you can cruise in January. And I'm going to take this from the perspective of people in North America, Americans, Canadians mostly, because that's where I live and that's where my experience is from. There's a whole nother part of the planet, Asia, Australia, New Zealand, that could be a completely different thing because of the difference in the seasons. But for our purposes, let's take it from the North American perspective. Also would apply a lot to people in Europe. I have not taken a cruise in January. However, there are some significant advantages to taking a cruise in January. You're probably going to be looking at a cruise to the Caribbean, the Bahamas, maybe possibly a Mexican Riviera cruise. That is one of the cheapest times of year to cruise. I know especially for Disney cruises, January cruises are, I think, the cheapest. January and September are the least expensive Disney cruises you're going to find. Also, you're unlikely to have many kids on your cruise in January because school would be in session. You're going to avoid hurricane season, especially for people like me who live in the northern part of the country where it's brutal winter in January. Escaping to the Bahamas or the Caribbean or Mexico during January is extremely pleasant. And even if it's not as warm as some people might consider it to be in those regions at the rest of the year, it's way warmer for us than it is here. So those are some of the advantages of taking a cruise in January. I can't really think of any disadvantages. Disney. I'm going to focus on just what we've done, even though I'd really like to visit Tokyo Disneyland. I'd really like to visit Disneyland Paris. I can tell you a little bit about Disneyland Paris from talking to people who've been there, but I'm going to focus on Disney World and Disneyland. And I've only been to Disneyland in California twice. I've been to Walt Disney World in Florida many more times than that. So most of what I talk about is going to be Disney World. But keep in mind that the climate is very different at Walt Disney World than it is at Disneyland or Disneyland Paris. And then Asia is just a whole nother thing. So, because that's 3 different climates themselves over there. I have been to Walt Disney World in January at least twice. And I really like visiting Walt Disney World in January. It's less crowded, at least the times I was there. It's a lot harder to gauge crowd levels these days because with the pandemic aside, they're saying now that in normal times that it's even crowd calendars aren't really that useful anymore because it's just busy all the time. But I still think that January is a good time to go, kind of for the same reasons that I talked about cruising in January is good, because there's less crowds, it's going to be less expensive, there's going to be fewer kids, and the weather is really going to be nice. For Florida, it's not going to be humid. It's going to be very pleasantly warm and enjoyable for people from northern parts of the country or Canada to visit Walt Disney World in Florida. I can say the same things actually for Disneyland in California. Now, for Disneyland Paris, January would be a very inexpensive and uncrowded time to go. Believe it or not, Disneyland Paris is open all year round, normally. It's not open right now. But one disadvantage is it's winter. It's winter in France, and there could be snow on the ground. Disneyland Paris really kind of freaks me out that they're open all year round because of that. But you can visit Disneyland Paris in January in normal times. So if you don't mind the cold and you don't mind going to Disney in the snow, it's an inexpensive, very uncrowded option to go to Disneyland Paris in January. Europe, I have not personally been to Europe in January. And sorry, a little aside, I know that Brexit just happened and that the UK is no longer part of the European Union. However, for the purposes of this video and just from my own experience, I have a lot of personal experience, and most of my time across the pond was spent living in Ireland and England. I'm going to include the British Isles and Ireland. I'm going to include those with Europe. My British friends, please forgive me if you don't like that I'm doing that, but I want to, for the purposes of this video, from an American perspective and a Canadian perspective, if you have to take that flight across the Atlantic Ocean, you basically think like, I'm going to Europe, okay? They're still gonna say, I went to Europe. That's just for the purposes of this video. Okay, I have not personally been to Europe in January. However, my son Andrew has spent almost 2 months in Europe in 2 different Januaries, in 2018 and 2019. And I'm gonna link the video all about those experiences right up here. He did 2 separate traveling study abroad January term experiences, which were extremely positive experiences for him. And I have asked Andrew about this. He has told me that there are definitely some advantages and disadvantages to visiting Europe. And he went to multiple countries. He went to North Africa first, and he went to France, Belgium, Ireland, Germany, Italy. I feel like I'm forgetting something, but he went all over and spent significant time in different places. He said that advantages are it's very uncrowded. There's like nobody around. And so, there's no lines. You don't have to wait for anything. It's really nice. And it is definitely a less expensive time to go because nobody wants to be traveling then. The main disadvantages, he said, were obviously the weather is not as nice or as warm as it would be in other times of the year. And he said sometimes things are closed. This was before the pandemic. So he said sometimes tourist attractions, restaurants, things like that might be closed. All right, let's talk about February. Again, I have not taken a cruise in February, but again, it's going to have a lot of the same advantages of January. One thing I would caution, however, is if you're planning on taking like a romantic couples cruise in February, it might get pretty busy and expensive around Valentine's Day. President's Day weekend is also in February, and for cruises, some cruises maybe, and definitely for Disney, you're going to see a price bump up around President's Day weekend, and you're also going to see an increase in crowds at Disney around President's Day. I have been to Walt Disney World in February. Again, it was a really great time to go. Lower crowds, except for avoiding those times that I said. Nice weather, really pleasant weather, can be less expensive as long as you're avoiding like the holiday weekend. I would strongly recommend going to Disney World in February. I said in a previous video recently that I really would like to go to Disney World on my next visit in November, December, January, or February. And one of the reasons I want to go in January or February, aside from the things I already said, is because I'd really like to go to the Festival of the Arts at Epcot, which is only held in January and February. I have visited Europe in February, and this is where you got to be, give me some grace with Europe. We went to London for a trip in February of when Andrew was 10. Okay, that's the last time I was there. And it was surprisingly pleasant in London. It was much more green. It was chilly. I mean, it was cool. We wore jackets and gloves and hats sometimes, but it definitely was not like the winter weather here in the States at home. And the crowds were low, prices were low. It was actually a very pleasant time to visit. All right, let's talk about March. I have taken a cruise in March. We went on the Disney Wonder in March. March is tricky because March you're getting into spring break and the prices are going to go up, especially the later in March that you go. There's also going to be possibly more kids on your cruises because you're going to be having spring breaks from different schools. And then the weather in the Caribbean and the Bahamas can be interesting. For example, when we went on our cruise, the weather was fantastic. It was beautiful. It was warm and sunny and very pleasant and low humidity and great. But when we went to go snorkeling and swimming on Castaway Cay, the water was so cold, we couldn't stand it. My kids tried to snorkel and Andrew was like, nope. It was like swimming in Lake Superior. If any of you are from Wisconsin, Minnesota, or Michigan and you swim in Lake Superior, you know what I'm talking about. It was so cold, we couldn't take it. And I don't know if it's like that all the time or, you know, like every March, or if there was something with the currents at the time we were there or whatever. But be aware, even in the Bahamas, the ocean water can be freezing depending on when you're there. And I should probably add that that could be the case in January or February too. If any of you have cruised in January or February and tried to swim in the ocean, like on a private island or something, tell us about that. What was the water temperature like in the comments below? It's still a nice time to cruise, but there are some caveats there for cruising in March. All right, let's talk about Disney in March. I have been to Disney in March more than once. This is where it really changes throughout the month. When we were there in 2015, at the very end of February, beginning of March, and over Ben's birthday, which is March 5th, it was great. It was still lower crowds. I don't think it was as expensive. It was nice. But if you go even 1 or 2 weeks later at the Disney parks, then you start running into that spring break thing again. It gets a lot more crowded. It gets a lot more expensive. Weather is still very nice. Oh my gosh, I keep forgetting things. I've been to Disneyland as well in March. However, it was when I was in California for my cousin's wedding in 1994, and we only went to Disneyland for the day. There was no Disney California Adventure yet. I went with my dad and my cousin and her boyfriend, and I really don't remember it. I think it was pretty busy and crowded though, and that's only from me looking at pictures. So I think we were probably running into spring break season. Otherwise, I can't tell you much about Disneyland in March, but I think it's going to have some of the same qualities as going to Walt Disney World in March, you know, with it changing through the month depending on spring break season. The weather was awesome. It was totally pleasant, nice, fantastic weather. For Europe, my mom and I went to Paris and London in March, and our experience was pretty good. It was pleasant weather, significantly warmer even in Paris than it was like spring there. It's definitely still winter in Wisconsin in March, but in Paris, like daffodils were coming up and there was no snow, and I was wearing like long skirts and just sneakers, you know, and I was very comfortable. A light jacket. I don't remember ever really being cold or anything. And at the time we were there, it was very light crowds. We didn't have to wait in line for anything. We didn't have any trouble getting around the city. The underground would sometimes be crowded, but that was just like for normal rush hour and things like that. When we went to London, it was a little bit less pleasant. It was gray like it usually is in Britain, and it was, I don't remember if it got rainy a little bit. It was a little bit chillier. But again, it was a really nice time to visit because it was very low crowds and I think pretty inexpensive time to go. So both February and March for me, my experiences visiting Europe were pretty positive, and I would definitely do it again. All right, let's talk about April. April's going to be quick and easy. I have done none of these things in April. I've never gone on a cruise in April. I've never gone to Disney in April. And I've never been to Europe in April. So if you've done any of those things in April, please share your experience in the comments below. Let's move on to May. Again, I have no experience doing any of these things in May. I have not done a cruise in May. I have not been to Disney in May. And I have not been to Europe in May, which is kind of surprising. And Megan was bringing this up the other day. Her birthday is at the end of May. And she was saying, Mom, we've done lots of little weekend getaways for her birthday, especially because it often falls like right at Memorial Day weekend. But we've never done a big trip over her birthday. And I guess probably the reason for that is it also runs into the very end of the school year. And so if we did a big trip, I'm a little nervous that we'd run into like final exams and things like that. Or maybe it wouldn't be a big deal at all. I don't know. We really should consider doing something over her birthday in May, and then I will be able to add to these experiences. But for now, we haven't. So if you've been on a cruise or to Disney or to Europe in May, please leave us a comment down below and tell us about your experience. I am very strongly considering possibly doing an Alaskan cruise over Megan's birthday. I'm really curious about this. I'm getting mixed information about doing an Alaskan cruise. The research I found online said that May is the driest time in Alaska, which very strongly interests me. Some people are saying, oh, you're not going to like it, it's too cold. I'm from Wisconsin. Alaska in May is positively balmy compared to what I'm used to, okay? Even if it snows, I don't care. That's not cold to me. We like the cold. We much prefer being cold, seeing things with snow on it, than we would being hot in the summer. So, and I really don't like bugs. So if we can avoid mosquitoes, that would be great. But people are giving me mixed information about whether an Alaskan cruise is better in May or August. August, it says there's a 50% chance of it raining every day. So I'd rather have no rain and be cold than be wet and warm. So tell me about that in the comments below too. Which do you think is better for an Alaskan cruise? Okay, let's go to June. You guys, this has been the hardest video to make, and it's probably going to take me like 2 days to edit because I cannot believe how many things I'm forgetting. I really should have written all this down before I started making this video. I have been on a cruise in June and July. We went on a 7-night Eastern Caribbean, Andrew and I, when he was 4, on the Disney Magic. That was my first cruise, and I started in late June and ended in July. It was hot. It was very hot, but it was not as bothersome hot on the ship to me as the time that I'm going to talk about coming up on our last cruise on Mariner of the Seas in August. The only place I remember it really being kind of uncomfortably hot was when we went on our tour of the butterfly farm on St. Martin. Other than that, I don't remember being like miserable hot or anything. There were a lot of kids on the ship, but I was with my kid on the ship, so I didn't care. I think it was probably a pretty expensive cruise. It was over the 4th of July. So that was a holiday week. I'm actually kind of surprised at myself that I would have done that. But I think at the time I was making decent money, and that's when we wanted to go, or that's when we could go. So that's when we went. It was probably a pretty pricey cruise, so just be aware of that. Summer cruises on Disney are the most expensive Disney cruises there are. And summer cruises for a lot of cruise lines are going to be the most expensive cruises there are, and especially over a holiday week like that. I've not been to Disney, and I have not been to Europe in June. The last couple years, Europe has had some brutal hot summers in June. And if you're not aware, a lot of places in Europe and the UK do not have air conditioning. You know, in the United States, it would be completely unheard of these days for a hotel, for example, not to have air conditioning. But a lot of hotels and lodging and homes in Europe and the UK do not have air conditioning. So if you're worried about that, if you're worried about heat like I am, I'm kind of steering away from doing Europe in the summer. I think the only way that I would do Europe in the summer now is if I was doing a cruise. And I know that I'm going to have the, I guess, population control, because you can only fit so many people on a cruise. And I would have the guaranteed climate control of the cruise to retreat back to after I spent time in port, for example. In all three of these places, because now you've expanded your cruise destinations. You could have European cruises, Alaskan cruises, all sorts of other cruises in the summer. In all three of these, you're going to see increased crowds, increased demand, and increased prices through all the summer months. I have been to Walt Disney World in July, and I have been to Europe in July. I actually spent the entire month of July in Ireland living with a host family the summer between my junior and senior year of high school. Okay, let me talk about Disney World first. No, do not recommend. Okay, my very first experience, which I talked about in this video, visiting Walt Disney World was in July, and it was unbearably hot and humid. It was incredibly crowded. It was only Magic Kingdom at that time. It was a very negative experience. I don't actually remember anything about it except for the incident I talk about in that video. I don't remember going on any rides. I don't remember eating anything. I don't remember anything because I was traumatized. So that was not a good first positive experience. And I hate being hot and humid. I struggle with the heat and humidity here in Wisconsin in the summer. I mean, it's pretty bad, but it's nothing like Florida. I personally don't ever want to go to Disney World in the summer months, or even probably May or September, maybe even into October, because it's just too hot and humid for me, and I do not like that. So if you're like me and you don't like heat and humidity, I would strongly recommend you do not visit Walt Disney World in the summer months. Disneyland in California is a little bit different. It is definitely going to be warmer because it's the summer months, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit more when I get to August. Historically, summer was also the most crowded time at Walt Disney World. Now, they're saying in recent years that that's gotten less so, and I think that's because people are trying to avoid the heat and humidity. The other thing you have to remember about Florida in the summer is it rains a lot every day. And you start to run, when you get to the end of the summer, you start to run into hurricane season, which we'll come to in a little bit. So there's definitely a lot of negatives to visiting Walt Disney World in Florida in the summer. My experience living in Ireland in July was, and this is in the 1980s, that was a very different experience from traveling and being there as a tourist, because I was living with a family and going to school. We were actually attending classes at a high school that, was closed for the summer. I took the bus every day and went to class and was learning about Irish history, culture, all of that stuff while I was there. It was like an Irish immersion experience. We did a little traveling. We took one weekend trip to Connemara, but it wasn't like traveling as a tourist like you would be with your family or whatever. And so I can't really talk about it from a tourism perspective because I wasn't necessarily going to sites that you would visit if you visited there in the summer. It was unusually hot. They commented and joked to us American students. We were there with a group of French and Spanish students as well. But to the Americans, they joked that we brought the hot summer weather with us that summer. Now, it was hot to them. It was like in the high 70s. That's definitely a pretty pleasant summer for me. I mean, here we get 80s, 90s all the time. It wasn't like that. And I think Ireland being an island, and I was right on the coast, and I could walk down to the beach every day and stuff like that. We had the ocean breeze and currents. So it definitely was not the kind of hot that we would get here at home. So it was okay. But I know that school trips from our high school here in town, the last couple summers that they've taken group trips in the summer, it's been just brutally hot. And so that's something to be aware of if you're nervous about heat and humidity and the lack of air conditioning that's available in European countries. You might want to avoid it. And again, it's going to be crowded and it's going to be expensive. Let's move on to August. August is my birthday month, and so I really want to travel in August. However, I kind of hate traveling at my birthday and don't really like when my birthday is because of that hot, humid weather. There's not a lot of places that I can go at my birthday to avoid that. I have done a cruise in August. Our last cruise, which was on Mariner of the Seas over my birthday in 2018. I will link the playlist from that up here so you can see all of our experience on that cruise. Okay, there were some advantages and disadvantages to cruising in August. And we were out of Miami going to the Bahamas. Again, there's lots of possibilities for cruises in August beyond the Caribbean and the Bahamas. You could go almost anywhere on a cruise in August. So this is limited to my experience going there. It's going to be different going to Alaska. It's going to be different going to Europe, the Mediterranean, you know, all those things. So keep that in mind. But for our experience cruising in August, the advantages were, holy man, it was cheap. I got such a deal on that cruise. It was really inexpensive. And I think that was because it was late enough in the month. If you compare cruise prices throughout August, you will see them take a sudden drop the later you go in August. And that's because a lot of schools go back into session. They kind of give a little bit of a deal. And then especially as you get into September, which I said earlier in the video, January and September are going to be the 2 cheapest months for cruising. And that's why. It's because schools go back into session and people aren't interested in going on vacation with their family anymore. The kids are back in school. That's also an advantage if you don't want a lot of kids on your cruise. But right near my birthday, right around that time, the price of cruises drops. And then another reason cruise prices drop in August, near the end of August, is because now we're in hurricane season. I have cruised in hurricane season more than once, and I've never had an issue. Keep in mind, cruise ship captains can steer the ship around the hurricane. A cruise ship can move. You're not going to get caught in a hurricane on a cruise ship. They see that weather coming. They have plenty of time and plenty of ability to move it around. The danger isn't getting caught in a hurricane. The risk is that your itinerary might be altered. And it might be altered in 2 ways. One way is that the ports of call that you might have visited might be changed. And it might be that you have to skip a port, or it might be that you have to do the ports in a different order. They have to rearrange which order they visit them in because of a hurricane. Or it might be that they have to change the itinerary entirely, and this does happen. So say you were booked on an Eastern Caribbean cruise, and because there's a hurricane coming, they have to change the itinerary to a Western Caribbean cruise. So the one thing I would advise if you're taking a Caribbean, especially cruise, or like a Pacific cruise during typhoon season over there and in the Pacific, is don't have your heart set on a specific port because it might not happen. Okay, so if you're just okay with the cruise experience and you don't mind which ports you go to, then great. But if you're going to be totally upset because you didn't get to stop in St. Thomas, don't book that cruise during hurricane season because it's too big of a risk. The second way that your itinerary might be altered during hurricane season on a cruise is it might affect your departure and your return. Because if a hurricane hits your embarkation port city, you know, Miami or Galveston also often gets affected by fog. Keep that in mind. And, you know, or Port Canaveral or whatever it is, if a hurricane is on path to hit that city, that port might be closed. So cruise ships might be delayed in returning from cruises, and cruise ships might be delayed in being able to leave from that port. So it could affect the length of your cruise. It could affect how long you're on the ship. It might get cut short, or it might get extended because you get stuck out to sea because you can't come into port. So that's a risk of hurricane season. It's never happened to me. 99% of the time it doesn't happen. So I really don't have any hesitancy about cruising during hurricane season because you can get some fantastic deals. But be aware there are these possibilities. You definitely want to have travel insurance during hurricane season. Another advantage was I really enjoyed being on a cruise over my birthday. That was really fun. Some disadvantages, aside from those things I talked about hurricane season, if that bothers you, is that it was so hot. It also rained in Miami, but we weren't in Miami that long. Like it's the summer downpour. Same thing at Disney. If you're at Disney in the summer, it's like a massive downpour for like a short period of time and then it's over. So if you don't mind that, if you don't mind having to seek shelter temporarily, but keep in mind when it's not raining in Florida in the summer, it's unbelievably humid all the time. So if you don't like that, don't go to Florida in the summer. Don't go on a cruise out of Florida in the summer, and don't go to Walt Disney World in the summer, because it's going to be like that. It's oppressively humid. It was so hot on our cruise on Mariner of the Seas in August that we couldn't walk around the top deck without something on our feet because they would burn on the deck. It was so hot. And it really made it difficult to enjoy a lot of the outdoor aspects of the cruise. For example, everything on that top deck, I mean, unless we were physically in the water, like in the pool or going down a water slide, we didn't want to be up there because it was just unbearably hot. And then going to the private island at Coco Cay, we didn't want to do anything on the island. This is before it got all renovated and everything, and got turned into Perfect Day. It was too hot. If we hadn't gotten an umbrella, we would have been dying. And again, unless we were in the water, like when we were physically swimming in the ocean, it was okay. But to be on the beach was too hot. To be out in the sun was too hot. I would not do a Caribbean or Bahamian cruise in the summer again. The only exception might be if I did a Disney cruise, just because I love them so much. Okay, sticking with August, I have to talk about Disney. We have not been to Walt Disney World in August, but we have been to Disneyland in California. Again, because we went late enough in the month, I think we actually went after my birthday. It was like, I think we flew home on Labor Day weekend. So it was like the very last week of August. We got bad luck for weather in that it was a brutally hot week in Southern California, that so much so that even the Disney employees were complaining. They were like, oh my gosh, it's so hot. They weren't kidding. It was like 100. It was an unusually strange, horribly hot week, the week we were at Disneyland in California in August. And they said it was very strange that it was like that. It wasn't normally it's pretty steady temperatures in California. I mean, it does get hot in the summer, but not like that. The only difference was I didn't mind it as much as that time I was visiting, as the times I was visiting Florida in the summer, because it was dry. It's not humid. And so it was very, very hot, but it wasn't unbearable to me. We dealt with that by every time we would start to get you start to get tired, and every time we would start to be like, I'm so hot, we would stop, we would take a break, we would get a snack and something to drink, and we would sit in the shade. And so if you just pace yourself and, be smart about it, it was completely manageable. Again, we had a positive experience with crowds at Disneyland at the end of August. And I think a big factor for that was I checked before we went, and the greater Los Angeles area school districts were all back in session by then. So there really weren't any families or kids that we were competing with. And we were there on like Tuesday through Friday, so during the week. So everybody had gone back to school, and it was pretty limited for crowds. We stayed at Paradise Pier, one of the official Disneyland hotels while we were there. Really liked that hotel. I would consider going to Disneyland in the summer, especially when we went, because I didn't like that it was hot, but I liked that we were going when the schools were back in session. That might also happen at the beginning of June. I'm not sure. But as long as you avoid the holiday weeks in the summer, I would be okay with visiting Disneyland again in the summer. Have not been to Europe in August, so I can't speak on that. Let's move on to September. September is another one of those months where I have not done any of these experiences. I have not cruised. I have not gone to Disney. Oh my gosh, I'm an idiot. I have been to the UK and Europe in September, October, November, December. Let's just get that out of the way, because I lived there for the whole time. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. Again, though, this is different than visiting as a tourist. I was living there. I was living in London. I was living with other students in one of the big terrace houses, and I was going to school. So that's I think I blanked it out because that's a very different experience than when you're visiting as a tourist. So that's a long range of time. I experienced all sorts of weather. I experienced all sorts of crowd levels. I was living in the city of London, and during that time also visited other parts of England, took the train over to Wales, took the ferry to Ireland, went back and visited my host mother from Ireland, went all over Ireland with a friend. Also took, the Channel wasn't built yet, took the ferry across the English Channel to Belgium, and took the train to Vienna, all through Germany, stopped in Cologne, went up the steps to the top of the tower in Cologne Cathedral, visited my friend Kirsten in Vienna, Austria. That was all in December, like right before Christmas. And then took the train all the way back to London, to where I was living, to stay another night and pick up my stuff before my flight home. So, oh my gosh, sorry about that. So yes, I have experience being in Europe for all of the fall months, September, October, November, December. I lived there, did all the things normal people do when you live in a city. And, you know, I rode the tube, I went to school, I went to class, I went to the movies, I ate out, I did all that stuff. I went to lots of theater, I went to clubs, I went to the pub, I did all of it. I rode the bus, I did all that stuff. Also, lots of experience traveling around during that time. But again, kind of a different experience when you live there versus when you're just visiting for a temporary time as a tourist. All right, October. I have cruised in October. I got married in October, and I went on my honeymoon cruise in October. We did a 7-night Eastern Caribbean cruise on Explorer of the Seas. We went to San Juan, St. Martin, St. Thomas, and Nassau, I think. Again, that's hurricane season, but again, didn't have any problems at all. The weather, as far as I remember, was very nice. It was very pleasant. I don't remember being terribly hot or anything, really. It was just like really nice. I mean, I was wearing tank tops and stuff in like summer weather, but it wasn't unbearably hot. I think we got a pretty decent price on that cruise. I remember that one I booked through cruise.com. I think I've kind of blocked that one out. Anything related to my ex-husband is a negative memory, and I've blocked it from my consciousness. So I don't remember a terrible lot about, I mean, I remember some negative things about that cruise, which I've talked about in past videos related to the ex, but I don't remember anything negative about the cruise experience itself. The one thing I would say, which I talked about in this video about my favorite ports, is I didn't do enough research for that cruise on things to do on the different islands and in the ports of call, and I wish I had done that more. My advice would be anytime you take a cruise, make sure you're doing your research on your ship before you pick it to make sure it fits you, and also on your itinerary to make sure you know if you want to get off the ship at certain ports of call, and if you do, what do you want to do there. I have not been to Disney in October. I would like to go to Disney in October because we'd like to experience the Halloween season. So I think that'd be fun. If any of you have done Disney in October, let us know about that. Have been to Europe in October, like I talked about earlier in the video. I was living in London in October. So October was when we had our midterm break, and my friend and I, we took the train to Wales, took the ferry across the Irish Sea to Dún Laoghaire, and then traveled all over Ireland on our midterm break. I don't remember there being like big crowds at tourist sites and things that we went to on that midterm break or anything. It was easy enough to get around. The whole time I was living over there, I was doing things like a student would do them. So I was doing things cheap. You know, I wasn't doing anything real expensive or typically like I would necessarily do when I'm traveling with my family now. I definitely had a whole huge wealth of awesome cultural experiences when I was living over there, which I treasure. I don't think I was approaching it as I would if I was just a tourist visiting these places at that time. And so my memory of it is different than it would be if I was going there on a vacation, for example. Okay, let's talk about November. November is actually a month that we travel quite frequently, or have traveled quite frequently in the past. I have cruised in November. Again, you're kind of at the tail end of hurricane season in November. It's pretty unlikely that you're going to have issues with hurricanes in November, but it's still there. It's going to be cooler. You might still have like some Hurtigruten cruises up in Norway, or some late Mediterranean cruises on like MSC or Costa or something, but for the most part, that's the time that ships are relocating back to the Bahamas and the Caribbean from Europe. Your transatlantic cruises, by the way, if you're interested in those are going to be in March, April, October, November. That's when you're going to find your transatlantic cruises going over to Europe or coming back across. So if you're interested in that, that's the time that you're going to need to be looking at. Those are the months. Is of course the one exception. The Queen Mary II does regular week-long transatlantic crossings. She is actually a ocean liner designed for crossing the ocean in the North Atlantic. So if you're interested, you can take the Queen Mary across the Atlantic almost year-round. She does do other cruises too, and I think she does like partial and total world cruises and things like that. It's not going to be every week, but a lot of the year. I am very interested in doing a transatlantic sometime. I think that would be awesome. I would love to do a westbound transatlantic on the Disney Magic when she relocates from Southampton back to New York City in November sometime. That's like on my wish list. One of the cool things about doing a cruise in November, if you go late enough in November, is the ships are going to be started to be decorated for Christmas, which can make for some fun activities and very cool photo opportunities. Otherwise, November can be a lower crowd time if you're not on the ship over Thanksgiving. We were on our cruise in November right after Thanksgiving, and there were a lot of kids, but I mean, I don't know. I think that was Disney again. I think Disney cruises are so well managed for activities and opportunities for kids. If you're worried about kids on a Disney cruise, you notice the presence of children, I think, less on a Disney cruise than you do on like Royal Caribbean. Royal Caribbean and cruises like that, I feel like the kids are just running all over wild and nobody's watching them and there's no organization to it. Whereas on a Disney cruise, there's so many structured, positive activities for kids to be involved in and places for the kids to go that are just for them, and family activities that families can do all together, that except for maybe at meal times when everybody's in the same room together, or maybe like at the shows at night, you're really not going to feel the presence of the kids as much. Like if you're an adult on a Disney cruise without kids, I really feel like you're not going to mind it as much as you would on some of the other cruise lines like Royal Caribbean or NCL because of that. Because that's one of the things I like so much about Disney, is because it's so structured and organized and offers so many great child, teen, family activities for people to do all day to keep everybody busy. You see a lot of child-free couples on Disney Cruise Line. It's an elegant, beautiful cruise line with gorgeous ships and tons of adults-only spaces too, and adults-only activities. So you see a ton of people, like couples and stuff, and multi-generational families too on Disney Cruise Line because it offers so many great things for everyone. There's my little Disney Cruise Line plug for you. Otherwise, I don't remember a ton about cruising in November. The weather's obviously going to be a little bit cooler. We were still able to swim in the ocean and everything at Castaway Cay fine. I know we were in shorts and everything the whole time. Like when we went to Atlantis on that trip. Disney in November have done this. I don't think we've ever been there actually over Thanksgiving. I think we've gone like just before and just after, and both of which were great. I like the weather at Walt Disney World in November very much. It's very pleasant and nice. And if you're avoiding the actual holiday week, in my experience, the crowds were low. Now, again, that's changed over time and crowds have gotten a bit more greater at Disney World as a whole all the time. We liked going in November very much. And if you go later in the month, again, Disney World is going to be decorated for Christmas. I would definitely go to Walt Disney World again in November, and I definitely want to because I want to go for the Festival of the Holidays, which is only at the end of like November, second half of November and December. In regards to Europe, again, I was living in the UK in London in November. I don't think in November I did any real traveling around. I think I was all in London during November. It starts to get cooler in November in the UK, darker. I don't remember having a major issue with rain living in London. Yes, it rained sometimes, but it didn't rain every day, and it never rained all day. I mean, it would rain on and off, and some days would be great, but there were lots of sunny blue sky days too. Let's move on to December. Okay, for December, I'm not sure if that Disney Wonder Cruise we went on in November actually extended into December. I'm not sure about that. The ship was already decorated for Christmas. That's going to be a big advantage for you if you want to do a Christmas cruise. They're also going to do special meals for Thanksgiving and Christmas on cruise lines. They, especially if there's Americans on board for Thanksgiving. It's a pretty time to take a cruise. It's up to you how you feel about that. Some people really like traveling at the holidays and think it's really neat. Some people would prefer to be cozy at home during the holidays. I could do either. You're out of hurricane season by the time you get to December, but it is going to be cooler weather, and cool is relative. It's still definitely way warmer than it's going to be here in Wisconsin and most of the United States. It's going to be kind of like it would be in Florida at the same time. You're going to probably run into some higher cruise prices in the end of November and through December because of people wanting to travel around the holidays, so be aware of that. If you can go early in November or early in December, you'll see a little bit lower prices than you would around the holiday times. Over Christmas and over New Year's are going to be the most expensive cruises you will see all year. Disney World in December, it's going to be kind of like March was. At the beginning of the month, it's going to be less expensive and less crowded. And as you get closer to Christmas and New Year's, it's going to get more expensive and much more crowded. This year during the pandemic was an exception to that, but that's not typical. Again, I'm not sure if we've actually been to Disney World in December. If we were, it was early in December in that less crowded, less expensive time. I really do want to go back to Disney during December, any Disney theme park, honestly, to see it all decorated for Christmas and try all the Christmas treats and things like that. And then Europe, again, I was living and traveling in Europe in December. It was cold. It snowed. It snowed in London. There wasn't considerable accumulation anywhere though. Even when I went to Vienna, and it was right before Christmas, it was cold and there might have been like some flurries in the air sometimes, but there wasn't any accumulation on the ground. The one day that it snowed in London, I remember we met our professor somewhere for our art history class. You know, there was like maybe like a half an inch to an inch of snow on the ground. And people were complaining because we hadn't brought boots and clothes and stuff for that kind of weather. Definitely very uncrowded in Europe in December. When I was in Vienna, the Christmas markets and stuff were set up. And we did go, Kirsten and I walked through there, and that was more crowded. It might have been on a Saturday. I'm not sure. But so, you know, if you get into things like that, like you do a river cruise in Europe in December to go to visit the Christmas markets, those themselves are going to be busier, but it's still going to be way less people than you would experience in Europe in the summertime. I hope that this helped you understand some of the pros and cons of taking a cruise, visiting a Disney resort, or visiting Europe in each of the months of the year. I really hope this was helpful to you. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give me a thumbs up down below. And if you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please be sure to subscribe. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, everyone. I wish you all the best and safe travels.